A tale of terror and suspicion from deep in East Texas. A town that changes forever after a beautiful teenager turns up missing.
It's as though she walked off the face of the earth, vanished.
What happened to Kelly Wilson?
We don't know if she's dead or alive.
As a lone police officer searches for clues, a separate team of investigators uncovers proof, it says, that this was the devil's handiwork. Satan worshippers had taken over, had taken Kelly.
We think there may be more victims.
There are tales of strange and ghoulish acts. Children, even adults, are confessing, implicating others. Those you would least suspect.
It was like people getting sucked into something.
And the case takes on a life of its own.
We went out to the witching circle. And this is probably that moment when I knew we were in deep trouble.
From Dennis Murphy, the harrowing story of a town besieged by lies and sheer terror. Where is the truth? Where is Kelly Wilson? Tonight, a touch of evil, a Dateline Special. From our studios in New York, here is Stone Phillips.
Good evening. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, what about evil? Tonight, some people who say they saw the face of evil and witnessed unspeakable crimes committed in the name of Satan. It's the story of a missing teenage girl. The search to find her would change the lives of just about everyone she knew, and some she didn't. And before it was over, there would be serious questions. Had they really been looking at the face of evil, or was it all in the eye of the beholder? Here's Dennis Murphy.
You look down the Anywhere strip of motels, fast food and car dealerships, and wonder why he settled in here, of all places. Gilmer, 5,000 souls, more or less, in the rolling hills of East Texas. Not even on the interstate.
Oh, I love the small town.
Folks here are raised on chicken fried steak and sweet tea, and the certainties of a Christian faith that fills the churches on Sunday. It doesn't look like fertile ground for the devil, but there are people in Gilmer who will look you straight in the eye and tell you that Satan, evil incarnate, came to town one day, and things have never been quite the same. There would be stories about the ritualistic slaughter of babies in the piney woods.
They were talking about witching circles and bones being found that were human and blood on the walls of a dungeon.
A prosecutor pursuing what he was sure was an unholy conspiracy of devil worshippers and the authorities.
We've got lots of work to do.
The hysteria would race down a dozen different pathways, but there's not much doubt that all of the fear and craziness that followed began with a pretty 17-year-old girl, Kelly Wilson.
You'd meet Kelly Wilson and it wouldn't take you but about 10 minutes. You'd know you'd met a young lady that was full of life, full of vigor, and you'd probably like her a lot.
Robbie Wilson, a proud father. His wife, Waverlyn, an admiring stepmom.
She wasn't scared of anything. She just wasn't shy. She just was very open. Never met a stranger.
And then again, maybe she did meet a stranger. Or maybe it was someone she knew. It's still a central part of the mystery of Kelly Wilson, because the stark biographical fact of her young life is that on January 5th, 1992, a Sunday evening, Kelly finished her shift as a part-time clerk here at the local video store and was never seen again.
Everything that could go wrong does go wrong.
Kelly's mother, Kathy Carlson, and her stepfather, Robert Carlson, have replayed that Sunday night over and over. 10 o'clock, 2 hours after the video store closed. It's a school night, and still no Kelly.
Are you calling around to her friends, or?
No, not really.
Do you ever say, wow, maybe we better call the police? Make them aware, in case there's an officer driving around, might see something, or see the car broken down, or?
There was never any reason to think anything.
But there were plenty of reasons to worry about Kelly, because beneath that sunny smile, she was leading a complex life. She was caught in a tearful, tantrum-filled tug of love between her two sets of parents. The quandary, to live with her father in nearby Louisiana as she had for most of her teenage years, or to stay on with her mother in Gilmer, Texas.
Were you happy to have her back home?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Her father, Robbie, said Kelly had planned to move back in with him and soon, sometime in the next week or so. But days before she disappeared, she still wasn't sure what to do. Here it was, midnight though, on that Sunday night, and Kelly hadn't come home. Had she impulsively run off to her father's?
I think you have all these emotions. I think you're mad, you're upset, like, you know, she always calls. Why hadn't she called?
When do you start to get ice water in your stomach?
When Robert goes down.
At 3 a.m., Kelly's stepfather, Robert, says he drove through Gilmer's rolled-up streets. The video store where she worked was no more than 2 minutes away. Parked beside the shop was her 1985 Dodge Charger.
I seen her car, then I went and looked inside, and there was a purse sitting there.
That had to worry you.
Mm-hmm. So I took the purse out of the car, went back home, and then we talked.
You know something's wrong. Because Kelly nor any other girl would go off without her purse.
At that point, do you call the police? Why not?
Well, basically because I thought you can't even report anybody missing for 24 hours initially.
When the sun came up, Kathy Carlson picked up the phone.
You get a call.
Kelly's mother told me that Kelly hadn't come home the evening before and she didn't know where she was.
And Kelly's mother called the Gilmer police. Sergeant James Brown answered the phone.
I would say that this is the one phone call that changed my life forever.
Brown was no rookie. He was second in command. Still, nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead. Brown agreed to meet the missing girl's mother at the police station.
I told him to come down, we'll take a report and start the investigation to find out where she is, if she'd run away or what had happened to her.
He went over to the video store, which is out of business now, but the building looks just as it did then, on the corner, right on the downtown courthouse square. Brown described the scene as he found it that Monday morning, 12 hours after Kelly's disappearance. Her Dodge Charger was down a few spaces from where the store manager remembered it being parked the night before, when he and Kelly had said goodnight. Someone had slashed her left rear tire.
The car had been moved. She had backed it out, pulled it down here, close to the back door area.
Brown saw no signs of a struggle, no blood. The doors were unlocked and the driver's window rolled down.
Keys in the car?
No, keys weren't in the car.
Anything else in the car itself?
The only other thing that was in the car was a bottle of vodka.
Sergeant Brown learned from the girl's parents that they'd found her purse in the car. From those few observations, he had to begin reconstructing the events of the day before. Kelly's final job of the night had been to make out the bank deposit slip for the day's receipts, and then make the deposit itself in the night drop at the bank a few blocks away. The store manager recalled he and Kelly locking up at 8:30 Sunday night.
He sees her. He sees her, gets in the car. She starts the car. He's driving off toward the square. He sees her taillights, so he knows the car started. He disappears around the corner.
A couple of skateboarders, teenagers, were hanging out at the courthouse across the street from the video store. One tells Sergeant Brown he saw Kelly drive off toward the bank and then come back into the store through the front door. Another kid remembered her turning off the store sign at 9:40 p.m. Two other boys, Kelly's high school friends, cruise by and see her car with a flat, but no Kelly. Who could help Brown put a reliable account together?
You had people that were getting out of church on Sunday night. You had people driving up the street. I mean, there was people all the way around.
This is the main square of town.
That's right, main square.
The policeman is dealing with scraps. A car, a purse, and evidence that the video store bank deposit was definitely made by someone. And despite all the people wandering around town, no one really saw anything.
You don't know what you have.
We don't know if she's dead or alive, she ran away. We don't know anything at that point in time except the fact that she's not at home.
It's as though she walked off the face of the earth. Just gone.
Vanished.
Where was Kelly Wilson? It would be a while yet before this boy would tell authorities that he knew where she was. The smell of sulfur, the dance of cloven hooves, still wasn't part of the mystery. Not yet.
When we come back, the case of a missing girl gets stranger by the hour.
We had been told that she was always prompt, she was always at home, everything was
Good, straight and level teen.
That's right. We had found that that was totally not the case.
When A Touch of Evil continues. A Touch of Evil, tonight's Dateline Special, will continue after this brief message. A Touch of Evil, tonight's Dateline Special, continues.
In the beginning, before it got really strange, Kelly Wilson was simply a missing persons case.
We're getting calls from everybody and everything.
Was she a runaway, somewhere sleeping off a hangover? Or was the purse she left behind in her car evidence of an abduction and foul play? For Brown, a veteran cop of 12 years, this was going to be either routine stuff quickly resolved or a career-making investigation.
You really cared about this case, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
This was your baby.
It was my case.
Here's what he had to go on. He knew someone had slashed Kelly's left rear tire on her car parked beside the video store. He knew someone had made the deposit for Sunday's receipts at the shop. And the security camera at the bank took a blurry photo of a car that looked like Kelly's. Was it?
Right, she's going to come over here to the back, huh?
Right, she's going to go to the bank drive.
The lead would need some following up. On the other hand, if her car was undrivable,
So this blue tile building over here is the bank where she would have made the deposit?
she could easily have walked the 2 blocks to make the deposit.
So if you're talking, in theory, about somebody being abducted, she is exposed.
That's right. At this point in time, she's by herself. If it happened out here, the thing that throws that off is her purse is in the car.
The question of who made the deposit would be the mystery inside the mystery of Kelly's vanishing.
Did anybody say at that point, James, this may be a big deal, let's string some yellow tape around this place, let's process the car, let's get some prints, let's see what's happened?
No, not at that point in time, because there was no signs of a struggle. I mean, the only thing we had was a car with a flat tire.
Months later, he would find out how that came to be. Sergeant Brown pressed one of the skateboarders, and the kid admitted he had punctured Kelly's tire. Out of boredom, he said, just screwing around.
Does the skateboarder have anything to do with this, in your opinion?
In my opinion, he doesn't, because he has, 1, he doesn't have a driver's license, 2, he's smaller than she was, and 3, he was just a kid.
It wasn't long before people in Gilmer began an organized search for the missing girl.
Start from the other side.
Looking inside old barns, draining swamps,
Give us a straight line, walk the straight line down.
and combing the woods,
And work down this shoreline.
hoping to find Kelly alive. Increasingly believing she was dead. Her mother and stepdad were part of that search.
You're constantly busy, trying to find her.
Our ideal of a weekend would be go searching a different place.
Get in the car and just...
Get in the car and go.
Sergeant Brown had virtually no experience working a homicide, but that's what this was looking like after 3 days. And he knew if he was going to solve this, he had to learn more about Kelly Wilson.
We had been told that she was always prompt, she was always at home, everything was
Good, straight and level teen, huh?
teen. That's right. We had found that that was totally not the case.
When Kelly first transferred to Gilmer High, she came across as so much the goody-goody that some classmates thought she was a narc, a snitch working for the cops. But that wasn't Kelly.
She was very outgoing.
The girlfriends who would come to know her best, like Michelle Downey, who'd moved in with Kelly and her family for 6 months, would remember her as not much different than the other kids. Kelly was up for parties and road trips across the state line to drink underage in Shreveport.
We were all partying together. She was never alone, hardly with anybody.
You ran as a pack, huh?
We ran as a pack.
Sergeant Brown was intrigued by the wild child theory. He knew she'd been out drinking the Thursday before she disappeared, a school night, and again on Saturday. Nothing out of character for Kelly Wilson.
We knew that she had spent time away from home before without calling, that she had done things that her mama didn't know about.
Kelly liked boys, and boys liked her. The ones closest to her immediately became suspects for Sergeant Brown. There was the unmarried 37-year-old manager of the video store where she worked, Joe Henry, the last person known to have seen her alive. Friends said Joe Henry was like an older brother to Kelly, someone she could confide all the soap operas of her life to. Yet he admitted under questioning that he did once jokingly offer her $1,000 if she'd sleep with him. And in another incident in the shop, he pulled down her sweatpants. The FBI gave him a polygraph test and asked him if he'd done anything to Kelly to keep her from talking. Had he seen her? Had he physically harmed her? No, he said he hadn't. But the FBI report states that the lie detector was showing deception. Off camera, Kelly's former boss told Dateline the polygraph test made him nervous, but repeated that he had had nothing to do with her disappearance. And what's more, he had an alibi for Sunday evening. A friend remembered talking to him on the phone as he cooked dinner. So Sergeant Brown believes him.
In my mind, he's not a suspect or a viable suspect.
And that left Sergeant Brown to interview the boyfriends. Kelly had had at least 4 different relationships in the last 2 years. One of them, Chris Denton, her most current, they'd partied the night before, had cruised by the video shop Sunday night after it was locked up. He and his buddy Marvin saw Kelly's car.
Yeah, as we were driving by, Marvin noticed the tire was flat. And so, like, okay, the tire's flat. Probably got a ride home or whatever. And we went right on home.
But Sergeant Brown said he had reports about Denton having a quick temper, being a hitter, punching a girlfriend. The cop went to the high school and asked the boyfriend to come down to the police station for a chat. Denton said he told Sergeant Brown what he told Dateline years later, that Kelly was a casual girlfriend to him. They'd only hooked up around Christmas, just a few weeks before she went missing.
We went to 2 parties together and went to a club together.
And you slept together. You had sex with her.
Mm-hmm.
Denton denied having a violent streak for women and objected to Brown's later characterization that he couldn't keep his story straight about what he'd been doing Saturday and Sunday night.
I felt like I was trying to help him. You know, it was a while before I realized this guy thinks I did something to Kelly and I'm a suspect.
There were other boyfriends getting the same looking over. An older one said to have dabbled in the drug trade, an obsessive one, either love-struck or a stalker, and a boyfriend from her high school days in Louisiana. But Sergeant Brown kept coming back to Denton. Where had he been that night? Why did he sell his car just a month after Kelly disappeared? Denton, the boyfriend, agreed to take a lie detector test. In all, he answered questions without his parents or an attorney present for 6 hours.
How'd he do?
He failed. Not 1, but 2.
You asked him the key questions and he flunked.
That's right.
What happens to him as a suspect at that point? Does he go to the head of the list?
It moves him up the list.
You failed the lie detector test.
That's what they told me.
It's another problem for you.
Well, it didn't make me look good, you know.
Brown actually ran down the car that Denton sold, and an analysis turned up no trace of Kelly's hair or blood. Denton says it was his mother's car and the family sold it because it was a lemon. Nothing fishy about it at all.
Did you kill Kelly Wilson?
No, did not kill Kelly Wilson.
Do you know who did?
No, I do not know who did.
Denton asks now if it makes sense that an 18-year-old, as he was then, could have killed a girl on purpose or accidentally, disposed of her body so well that no one would find a trace in nearly 10 years, and then gotten cleaned up to be back home all in less than an hour's time.
I have no idea what happened to Kelly, where she's at, what happened to her. Don't know anything about it. The only thing I know that I wish I'd never met her.
Denton was another brick wall. The sergeant's investigation was all hunches and unprovable theories. Not that he wasn't working it as hard as he knew how.
But for all of the shaking of the bushes that was going on, nothing was coming out, was it?
Nope, nothing was coming out. I mean, the only thing that was coming out was the frustration.
Kelly Wilson stayed missing. Weeks turned into months. The teenager became an icon, a billboard. Sergeant Brown, on his way to being obsessed with an investigation heading for the cold case file, had arranged for the billboard. He made Kelly notes to himself in his personal diary, turning the few clues that he had this way and that. And then he went back to something that had always bugged him right from the get-go about the case. That first meeting he had with Kelly's mother.
When she came in, she knew her daughter was missing and that she was dead.
From your very first conversations?
From the first conversation.
Not that my 17-year-old girl didn't come home last night and I'm worried about where she is.
No,
She's saying my 17-year-old didn't come home and I believe that she is
dead.
After all the suspicion about lust-crazed boyfriends, rumors that she got mixed up with a drug crowd, was it really a much simpler matter? Was the answer to Kelly Wilson's disappearance right inside that little house she lived in off Gilmer's main street? The house where she'd passed so many tortured nights about whether to stay or whether to go.
When we come back, a growing list of suspects, friends, and family.
Did you kill your daughter, Kelly?
Absolutely not.
The search intensifies and rumors begin to fly when A Touch of Evil continues. A Touch of Evil, tonight's Dateline Special, will continue after this brief message. We now return to A Touch of Evil.
You don't think about the details of what was going on, but she's always there. When you wake up in the morning, she's there. When you're driving to work, she's there.
There, maybe to her mother, but to everyone else, Kelly Wilson was long gone. Grabbed by a stranger, killed by a boyfriend. Was it about lust, drugs, or something even more sinister? Who could say? As the days turned into months, Kelly ceased to be that vibrant, fun-loving teenager and became simply the case that had to be solved.
The case.
The case.
We worked on the case, and you can deal with it that way because you're maintaining emotional strength to get through the day so that you can be strong to do whatever you have to do.
Sergeant Brown still had the case, but there was one path he'd avoided going down until 4 months into the investigation. That's when he says Kelly's mother made a surprising request.
And she had came into the police department and demanded that the case be closed. Of course, my response to that was, we're not going to stop investigating this case until we find your daughter.
The mother puzzled him. Sergeant Brown knew, as most detectives will tell you, that the majority of people murdered are killed by someone they know. Did that happen to Kelly? And so Sergeant Brown took a closer look at the missing girl's immediate family. Thinking back, he remembered things that didn't seem quite right inside that little yellow house. For starters, he thought Kathy Carlson didn't act like a grief-stricken mother.
I mean, she got rid of things that belonged to her daughter that a normal person that was missing a child would have kept sacred.
Shrines to the dead or missing children.
That's right. Something that can say they're coming back. That hope. But in her case, it was, she's not coming back. We're going to get rid of her stuff.
And if Sergeant Brown needed any help in nurturing his suspicions about something not being right in the mother's house, her ex, Kelly's father, and stepmother Waverlin were eager to feed him tidbits.
Let's be blunt. You two were suspicious.
Yes, we were.
Kathy was involved in the disappearance of Kelly.
That's correct.
The father and stepmother's suspicions began the very morning they arrived in Gilmer, after receiving the news that Kelly hadn't come home the night before. Robbie says he walked into his ex's kitchen and was thrown by her demeanor. It was a wake in progress.
I didn't expect to see her in the mood that she was in. You know, in effect, planning a funeral for somebody that you don't even know is passed.
She's preparing to
bury
Kelly.
Right.
Oh, she even told me what the arrangements were and where Kelly was going to be buried.
She's been a missing person for only 24 hours.
I know.
There were little things like Kelly's car keys.
I mean, we were specifically told that Kelly was missing, the keys were missing, and it was the only set of keys to the car.
And yet, Kelly's younger brother was driving the car and calling it his just a few days after Kelly disappeared.
Not just a trivial thing.
No,
Where did
not
that car key come from?
Right.
And Kelly's purse. Remember, her parents said it had been left behind in the car. But when Sergeant Brown arrived, the purse was gone. Kelly's stepfather said he'd taken it home, and that raised more questions.
I'm guessing that one of the details that probably spooked you the most was that Kelly had become separated from her purse.
Did she?
And there was the mysterious bank deposit. By now, a closer investigation of that bank security camera picture had ruled out Kelly Wilson's car as the one seen in the drive-thru. Let's assume for a minute that Kelly was abducted. Would her killer, if that's indeed what happened, have gone to the trouble of making the bank deposit? Kelly's father reasoned that he simply would have taken the cash and run. But, and here's something else that made him suspicious of his ex. He theorized that Kelly's family in Gilmer would have recognized the bank deposit slip for what it was and gone ahead and made the deposit after cleaning up from some kind of fatal argument inside the house.
My theory is that's the reason nobody ever noticed anything, because if she got picked up by a family member, it was something so common or so ordinary, nobody noticed it, you know.
And there was something else. Kelly, it turned out, had had her car tires slashed only 2 nights before in the very same parking place beside the video store. What she'd done then was call her stepfather to come down to get her. To Kelly's biological father, it made sense that she would have done the same thing that Sunday night. Called home, hopping mad, "Come get me." Her father wonders if there had been a violent shouting match about which set of parents the teenage girl was going to live with.
Let me ask you an ugly question that's a summation of all of this theory of Robbie and Waverland. Did you kill your daughter, Kelly?
Absolutely not.
In an angry moment. Not using the word murder, maybe it's accidental. Did she die under your roof that night?
Exactly not. That is the most ludicrous, sickening. Sickening. To think that somebody can think that and convince other people of that is just beyond our comprehension.
Kathy Carlson refutes all her ex-husband's allegations as yet more bile from an acrimonious divorce, poisoned even more by Kelly's disappearance. Robbie, she said, couldn't accept the blunt fact that something obviously very bad had happened to their daughter.
She had not come home. She had not run away.
Do you think he was overly optimistic? Were you being realistic where he was?
I was more realistic, I think, and he was more optimistic.
The keys to Kelly's Dodge.
I can't remember if we had a spare for hers or not, and you went back and locked it up. I can't remember.
In the end, Sergeant Brown brought Kelly's mother, stepfather, and younger brother in for a lie detector test. They all passed on the critical questions. And after her time on the skewer as a suspect, Kelly's mom turned on Sergeant Brown.
It was just too much incompetence.
Now Kelly's mother was asking Sergeant Brown pointed questions about what she felt was shoddy police work. Why hadn't he impounded the car, checked for fingerprints, kept all the evidence intact?
He told me I could throw everything away.
You could throw everything away?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't care about the bottle or the slash
He said I
tire,
could throw it away.
By the first anniversary of Kelly's disappearance, other people in town were grousing about the competence of Brown's police work. Rumors began flying about Brown himself. Was he protecting someone with his sluggish investigation?
Looking back, early on, people ask us, what about James Brown?
Early on?
Mm-hmm.
Sergeant James Brown's turn on the spit was at hand because a 7-year-old boy had stepped forward with an astonishing story. He said he'd witnessed the murder of Kelly Wilson.
They'd taken her
from the grocery store.
10 years later, you'll hear that one-time little boy tell a story that sounds like the plot of the goriest teen slasher movie ever filmed.
That shed, they'd held her there.
And they tortured her there, huh?
Right.
He said in the black of night, and in these very woods, the devil was at work.
When we come back, a whole new tale turns a town on its head.
The little boy said that he knew who abducted Kelly Wilson.
Horrifying accusations, the devil's own doing, when a touch of evil continues. Continue with A Touch of Evil, tonight's Dateline Special.
There's an old Indian trail running out of Gilmer called The Trace. It's paved 2-lane blacktop now through marshy pine woods. Once you get out past Kelsey Creek, you're in the sticks. It was out here on the twists and turns of The Trace that some people believe that old trail led right to the missing Kelly Wilson. A little boy had told them The Trace was more than country. It was the gates of hell.
This little boy had the story to tell that just shocked everybody. Huh?
It just blew him off their feet.
Raymond Smith was only 7 years old at the time. What he recounted, the things he says he saw out in the woods in the dark of night, would make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
The little boy said that he knew who abducted Kelly Wilson.
Little Raymond's story you're about to hear had its roots in another investigation altogether. One out on the trace that had nothing at all to do with Kelly Wilson, at least not in the beginning. There was a sprawling family of 3 generations living out that way, people called the Kerrs, and they were being investigated by the state authorities, caseworkers from the Child Protective Services, on charges of child molestation. The state placed 14 of the children from the Kerr home with foster parents. And importantly, it would turn out they took someone else, another child said to be a victim of abuse, a playmate of the Kerr kids, 7-year-old Raymond Smith. Years later, he still remembers being put in the car and taken from his mother.
They grabbed me and my brother, and we just kind of drove out of town.
Raymond was placed in a foster home. That's where social workers began to draw out details of the boy's alleged abuse at the hands of his mother and her longtime boyfriend.
During that time, it was questions and more questions. And
did they do this to you? Did they do that to you?
Yeah.
But one of the social workers detected hints in Raymond's story of something even more chilling than child abuse. Was it possible that the Kerrs and their associates had formed a satanic cult? Were they not only molesting children, were they actually murdering them? Offering them up as sacrifices in some unimaginable rituals. Raymond, along with the other children in the foster home, began drawing pictures of people hanging from trees. They told stories of torture, rape, seeing infants butchered. It happened, said the children, in these woods, 100 yards behind the Kerr place. At night, with the grown-ups wearing devil masks. In sworn testimony, a social worker and a police investigator recounted the children's stories. The children were sexually molested, passed around from man to woman. They remembered an underground elevator shaped like a male sex organ. Babies were slaughtered in the place they called the witching circle. And then the little boy said something that would change some lives forever. He said he was with the satanic cult members the night they abducted Kelly Wilson in their van. And he said he witnessed her torture and her murder. For the social workers, it was all horror beyond words, and clearly they were in over their heads. They were going to need a dedicated investigator and prosecutor to root out a macabre, bloodthirsty cult and put them away. The child social workers found their man in Scott Leifert, an attorney in private practice in Galveston.
We think that there may be more victims, but we don't have any concrete evidence. We don't have any particular missing people that we're looking for.
He'd worked on another sensitive child custody issue. A judge appointed Leifert as a special prosecutor with the investigative authority of a district attorney. He was joined by two experts on Satanism and cults, one a former state police officer, the other an ordained minister. Together with the two social workers, the five became a tight-knit investigative group known as the Team. And what a grisly mission it had. To bring an end to the satanic cult that had allegedly murdered Kelly Wilson, and who knew how many others. They took Raymond to identify a garden shed that had been seized from the Kerr property.
Recognize this little guy here?
Yeah.
You told him something had happened in that shed, didn't you?
Right.
What was that?
That Kelly Wilson had been chained up there.
The Team ordered in backhoes, men with shovels, to dig at two different sites where the Kerrs had lived, searching for evidence to corroborate Raymond's grisly story. At one site, they came up with a bone fragment, they said, of another young girl named Hope. Then, a breakthrough. Two adult women in the group, already charged by the special prosecutor with child abuse, and now confronted with Raymond's story, confessed and began talking, adding even more lurid details to the boys' account of Kelly's abduction, torture, and murder. Kelly, one of the witnesses said, had been presented as a gift to the matriarch of the satanic cult, the elderly Geneva Kerr. Only the teenager's head remained, according to alleged cultist Connie Martin, a common-law wife to one of the Kerrs. The cult members, she told local television, had devoured Kelly's body in a satanic communion.
Kelly's head she stuck in her freezer. And then later sometimes she'd take it out and set it up on the counter and put candles around it, red candles, and she'd have them burning, and she'd look at me and the kids and say, if you ever open your mouth, this is what's going to happen to you.
The last of Kelly, as told by Raymond and the two adult women, goes like this. The cult had identified the pretty teenager as a sacrificial victim. After she was forced into the van, Kelly was held captive nearly 2 weeks in this garden shed. At night, she was taken out to the woods, to the witching circle, where she was raped and tortured by members of the cult. On the final night, she was stabbed to death and butchered. The Team gathered supporting evidence, some videos, what they called a household satanic altar. There were devil masks and instruments of torture. What's more, said one of the experts, a flyover of the site revealed hot spots where bodies may have been buried. And one of the satanic experts on the Team found that Kelly's kidnapping did indeed coincide with the birthday of the high priestess of the cult.
Kelly was a birthday present?
Mind-bending, stomach-churning stuff. What happened to the teenager from the video store? Imagine being the parents.
Your worst nightmare. Disbelief.
I basically just had a couple of questions. I said, how do you know that Kelly's dead? And he said, because I have witnesses that said that's seen her killed. And I said, well, where's her remains? He said, you'll never find her remains.
It was up to Special Prosecutor Leifert to turn those stories of cannibalism and a satanic cult into proper murder indictments. His main suspects among the Kerrs were already in jail on child abuse charges. They weren't going anywhere soon. Still, Leifert needed time to put his complicated murder case together. The Team was convinced it had ripped apart a murderous gang of terrifying dimensions. But how many had been killed? How many other Kellys? How many babies? And how many other members of the satanic cult were still out there, other than the ones locked up? The investigation would continue with urgency.
This was more or less a hangout for the kids.
Sergeant Brown, meanwhile, found himself out on the trace without a clue about this mega breakthrough in his investigation into the disappearance of Kelly Wilson. The special prosecutor and his team of social workers and satanic experts had run away with his potentially career-making case. No one wanted to hear any more about jealous boyfriends. not when the finger of suspicion pointed directly at evil itself.
People were looking for the devil's footprints in Gilmer, Texas, huh?
That's true. If they believed that way, that's what they were looking for. If they could see the guy with the pitchfork and the pointed tail, that made them happy.
Personally, Sergeant Brown thought the special prosecutor's satanic cult theory was so much hysterical hogwash. But he quietly ran his own investigation into the Kerr family anyway.
He shook a lot of people up for a long time.
Gilmer, though, was in an uproar. A local girl plucked off the streets and eaten by Satanists? Sentiment quickly sided with the special prosecutor. If Gilmer needed an exorcist, and clearly it did in the popular imagination, then the team was the one to take the devil on. Sergeant Brown became the subject of a whispering campaign. Babies being eaten in the woods. A cult abducting people from the streets. How could someone like a police officer not see all of this? And with a little more innuendo and arched eyebrows, the whisperers asked how it could be that Brown had worked for 2 years on the Kelly Wilson case and not come up with anything concrete.
It was like people getting sucked into something. It was a witch hunt.
And what about Sergeant Brown himself? Was he trying to hide something? Is that why he always seemed to be shielding his eyes behind those dark sunglasses he wore?
Either you were for them or you were Satanists. If you didn't believe the way they believed, then you were one of them.
He must know something. The whispers.
When we come back, a police officer learns no one is safe.
SWAT team? You're taken down by a SWAT team?
Yes.
When A Touch of Evil continues. Our Dateline special, A Touch of Evil, continues.
Ten members of the Kerr clan and their associates, 5 men and 5 women, were in jail awaiting trial on 42 counts of child sexual abuse. People in Gilmer studied their faces for telltale signs of the evil they were hearing about. Were the Kerrs a country version of the Manson family? Because what had started as a social worker's investigation into reports of child abuse had erupted into something much bigger. The unmasking of a fiendish satanic cult. Some members of it were confessing to the abduction, sexual torture, and slaughter of Kelly Wilson, Gilmer's missing teen.
Part of it was very fascinating because I could actually feel myself getting anxious.
Dr. Bruce Perry, a respected child psychiatrist, had been asked by the state of Texas to evaluate the story of ritualistic murder in the woods behind the Kerr place being told by Raymond and some other children. He agreed to consult with the prosecutor, the 2 social workers, and their 2 experts on Satanism, the group known widely as the Team. Their meetings early on were tense.
They were all worried about the personal safety at that point and prior to that because they felt that they were uncovering a very extensive, very well organized satanic cult, and that they'd been told by people across the country that for the first time they had the smoking gun that proved that satanic ritual abuse existed.
Secrets. Even grand jury testimony aren't kept long in a place as small as Gilmer, Texas. And before long, the grapevine had it that the team's investigation had kicked over all sorts of rocks, and nasty things were scurrying out into the unwelcome light of their probe. There were rumors of drug trade involved, porno rings, snuff films, and as the whispers had it, some prominent local citizens were behind it all. Kelly's father and stepmother from Louisiana were asked to meet with the team at its headquarters inside a Christian retreat.
We were given instructions on where to meet them, and the further we drove and the further back in the woods we went, it was getting scary.
These are the officers of the state of Texas.
This is right, and they let us know that they were armed.
For his part, Sergeant Brown found himself frozen right out of the Kelly Wilson case. The team wasn't interested in anything he had.
They were very secretive about their work, weren't they?
That's right. Very bunker mentality.
By now, through the confessions of cooperating members of the Kerr family, The team had stitched together even more awful details about how the cult operated.
They had these two women who were talking in great detail about the rituals and about the murders, and they had these kids that were doing the same thing.
By their accounts, the children were given a drugged coffee mixture and then forced to have sex with the adults out in the woods. Infants were murdered, stabbed and their brains removed inside the witching circle behind the Kerrs. The blood, it was thought, would drain through the roots to the devil himself. What's more, two members of the cult from their jail cells stated that Wendell Kerr, a long-haul trucker by trade, had been the one who stabbed and killed Kelly Wilson. The cultists making that accusation were Kerr's wife and sister-in-law. And then the little boy revealed another detail to the team. He remembered a man in uniform being present the night Kelly was kidnapped.
They'd asked me if I'd known any police officers or people of that sort, and I told them yes, that I did know some police officers.
This was explosive new information for the team. They confronted one of their other cooperating Satanists, Connie Martin, and asked her point blank, was there a police officer in on this cult? She said there was. And he was indeed there the night Kelly was stabbed to death.
Who's holding her down?
This is a recording of the team's interrogation of Connie Martin about that first night with Kelly inside the witching circle, cult members surrounding her.
And she was crying.
Who said, we are going to kill you?
James.
James said, we are going to kill you, or I am going to kill you?
No, he said, we.
Okay.
The mysterious man in uniform, James. Suddenly, it all made sense to the team. Why the Kelly Wilson investigation had foundered. The town had entrusted the investigation of her disappearance to one of the very people responsible for it. On January 21st, 1994, Sergeant James Brown was attending a law enforcement conference in College Station, Texas, south of Gilmer. He'd been tipped that something was going down with a special prosecutor. So when he got back to his hotel, he wasn't entirely surprised at what happened next.
There's a police officer standing in the hallway. I walk up to him and I said, who are you looking for? He says, I'm looking for James Brown. I said, I'm him. The gun's in the briefcase locked up. And from then the SWAT team pours out.
SWAT team? You're taken down by a SWAT team?
Yes.
Read your rights? Cuffed?
Cuffed, read my rights, stood there, the whole 9 yards.
James Brown, Gilmer police sergeant, was charged with the murder of Kelly Wilson. Could Sergeant Brown be a Satanist? A killer?
Shocking. We didn't believe it at first either. You know, you just kind of step back because that's been your main person on the case was James Brown.
We went to see him in jail, and he just said, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. And he never looked us in the eye, he never called her name, he just said it's wrong. And my thought was, wrong for what? To get caught?
Sergeant James Brown was locked up in the Upshur County Jail, pending a first appearance in court, where he would face charges that carry the death penalty.
I believe he's involved.
So now you're seen in a whole different light, not just an inept or botched investigation, but deliberately
maybe a cover-up.
Skewed, under-investigated, huh? How much do you think the world had gone upside down?
At that point in time, it had turned all the way upside down.
When we come back, suspicions and the case itself spin out of control, raising alarms in the state capitol.
I turned to him and I said, does it bother you that you haven't found any physical evidence at all that any of this occurred here?
When A Touch of Evil continues. A Touch of Evil, tonight's Dateline Special, will continue after this brief message. We now continue with A Touch of Evil.
He was the #2 cop in town, and now he was charged with murder, accused in the very case he was trying to solve, the disappearance of Kelly Wilson. Sergeant James Brown is sitting in a jail cell, and I'm guessing pretty confused.
Real confused, real hurt. I had just been married, hadn't been married long. Here I am indicted. Everything that I've ever worked for is gone.
Brown had been charged with capital murder because a member of the alleged satanic cult and a small boy had confessed that the policeman had been in on the girl's ritualistic murder. But the unfounded buzz on the streets of Gilmer added more juicy detail. Kelly was pregnant with Sergeant Brown's baby, and supposedly his patrol car was spotted in the alley beside the video store that Sunday night. And there were people who would swear that if you looked at those pictures taken by the bank deposit security camera, you could positively ID the police sergeant.
After studying that over many, many times, I became convinced that the person leaning out the window is James Brown.
What stood between James Brown and a growing mob mentality in Gilmer was a local attorney named David Moore.
He was terrified, and you know, as his attorney, I was scared for him.
His lawyer's first job was a hearing to get Sergeant Brown sprung from jail while he awaited trial. The judge agreed to release him, but with conditions. Brown's parents had to put up their home to guarantee he'd be back in court. Then the judge ordered Sergeant Brown to get out of town. Get out of town?
Yes. Because they felt he was a threat to society.
Not the honeymoon that Sergeant Brown and his new wife, Penny, had planned.
The stress of everything, losing everything. I mean, it was unimaginable.
Did you have a paycheck?
No. No paycheck.
Couldn't go back to the police?
Couldn't go back to the police department. Was suspended without pay.
Any other job you could fall back on?
No.
Have any savings? Any money?
What little we did, we lost.
Sergeant Brown had a good idea how he'd ended up in jail, but he couldn't get anyone in authority to hear him out. For what it was worth, Brown still had supporters in Kelly's father and stepmom over in Louisiana.
No way was he involved.
You believed in Brown?
Still do.
But Kelly's mother in Gilmer believed something quite opposite. She was just as convinced that Sergeant Brown was guilty as charged, a member of the satanic cult that raped, tortured, and murdered her little girl. What was persuasive about it?
We had no body. We still have no body. There's nothing.
And something rushed in to fill the void. Vigilante justice. People, including Kelly's mother, began taking the law into their own hands.
Well, we won't show that part. It was open when we got here.
With Sergeant Brown no longer on the case, the Kelly Wilson investigation spiraled out of control. Her mother, Kathy, and a local TV news crew actually broke into one of the Kerr family homes to have a look around.
Where's the blood on the walls? We must be in the wrong place.
We must be in the wrong place.
And Kelly's mother, by now, wasn't the only amateur detective in town. A group calling itself the Justice for Kelly Wilson Committee began conducting videotaped interrogations. Neighbors spied on neighbors as Kelly Wilson and the satanic cult grew into a complex conspiracy theory with Gilmer as the hub of all sorts of evildoing. Meanwhile, the team, being led by Special Prosecutor Scott Lyford, was spoon-feeding details of the satanic cult to the media, which couldn't get enough of the sensational story.
We're looking for the kind of things that you look for when a person has been in a place, any kind of hair, any kind of blood, any kind of tissue, anything you can find.
And just who exactly were these crusaders who'd come to save Gilmer? The team. Scott Lyford, the bench-appointed special prosecutor, had only limited experience doing criminal work as an assistant county attorney 10 years earlier in his career. Ann Gore, the social worker from the state's Child Protective Services, who'd first thought she detected hints of satanic activity, was on her first major case. Debbie Minshew, the other state social worker, was the more experienced senior. Stephen Baggs, the satanic cult expert, was a retired state police phys ed teacher. Brooks Flagg, the second satanic expert, was a TV producer turned preacher and volunteer police chaplain. Nominally, the team was assigned to prosecute the Kerrs and others under the laws of the state of Texas. But read a memo from their files and you quickly see they were working on behalf of a higher power. They write, "By what authority do we work on the Kerr case? All power is from God." Scripture defined their mission. Matthew 10:16. "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves." Nothing less than a showdown between the forces of good and evil was being played out in little old Gilmer, Texas. But things were beginning to turn. Some of Gilmer's elders had had a bellyful of the special prosecutor's handling of the grand jury and of his investigation in general. The team's indictment of Sergeant Brown on the thinnest of evidence, with rumors that they were going to go after the sheriff's office next, was the last straw. Calls for help, cooler, more experienced hands went out to the state's attorney general's office in Austin.
We had gotten a phone call from a number of officials in Upshur County, and they were very concerned that this case had just completely divided their community. They were being made into a national embarrassment.
At the time of the case, Shane Phelps was a chief prosecutor for the Texas State Attorney General's office.
The very first question that popped into my mind, what in the world are they doing indicting people for capital murder charges in the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl? The cases were 42 indictments of 10 people for sexual assault of children.
Phelps and his aides from the Attorney General's office met with the team at a safe house just outside of town.
They didn't trust the police department. They didn't trust the sheriff's department. They didn't trust the FBI. And I don't think they trusted me.
The chief prosecutor heard out the team's theory. Witching circles, dungeons, human sacrifice, and the cult operating with local police protection. But the new investigators also demanded to see the goods, the hard forensic evidence collected to justify those allegations.
I almost detected some enthusiasm in having somebody come in and be able to show somebody, look what we've done. But on the other hand, this same kind of paranoia.
Them and us.
No question.
The special prosecutor outlined his case to the outsiders from the Attorney General's office.
They took us out to the Kerrs. We went out to the witching circle. This is probably that moment when I knew we were in deep trouble. It was just a path through the woods that doubled back and came back. That was it. There was a tree in the middle of it that had been cut down. They said it had been desanctified.
But where was the forensic evidence the team had collected? The blood and hair from what had, after all, been described as a slaughterhouse. There was none. The team's crime scene investigation had come up clean as a whistle.
I turned to him and I said, does it bother you that you haven't found any physical evidence at all that any of this occurred here? And he looked at me, and I will never forget this as long as I live. He said, these are master Satanists. The fact that there is no evidence proves that it happened. And at that point, I had the same reaction you just did. It sent chills down my spine.
What about the garden shed where Kelly was said to have been locked up for nearly 2 weeks? Surely that would have a trace of her.
Twice they searched that thing.
Found
nothing. Nothing.
The lab results showed blood on a shovel, but it wasn't tested. Hair samples? Not the missing teens. And on the so-called instruments of torture they seized, not a strand of Kelly's DNA. No bodies, no bones, nowhere on the Kerr property. But remember, hadn't the special prosecutor produced what he said was a human bone, exhumed from a place where some of the Kerrs used to live? The one the cult woman said may have come from a girl named Hope.
Ultimately, that bone, when we had it analyzed by a much more sophisticated laboratory, turned out to be a pig bone.
It would be laughable if the consequences weren't so great.
Absolutely.
This isn't the middle of the deep, dark, mythical woods.
No, it's not. There's no evil out here. There's no pitchfork, and there sure ain't no Satanism.
With the arrival of Phelps and the new investigators from the AG's office, Sergeant Brown was able to tell his theory of how he'd managed to get himself indicted for murder. It had to do with challenging the special prosecutor, Lyford. The team, you remember, said a long-haul trucker named Wendell Kerr had been the one to kill Kelly in the woods on that night in January. Sergeant Brown, working on his own, took the trouble to actually pull Wendell Kerr's logbook for his vehicle and look at gas receipts. The so-called cultist was nowhere near Texas the day Kelly was said to have died.
We had pulled trucking records, load receipts that showed him to be in New York. He was never in town that night.
Sergeant Brown showed team members the new information he dug up about Wendell Kerr. The special prosecutor, Brown remembers vividly, was not pleased to be presented with new facts that didn't fit his theory of the crime.
He said, if you don't leave this case alone, I will ruin you politically, publicly, personally, and your life.
And in fact, just 5 weeks after that threat, the special prosecutor's grand jury indicted James Brown for murder. When Phelps and the new investigators asked Prosecutor Lyford how he could explain the discrepancy posed by the trucker's records, he replied that Kerr's signature had been forged. Not so. Phelps sent them off for expert lab tests, and the trucker's signature was found to be legitimate.
Was it a problem for Lyford that one of his principal defendants in this thing had an alibi that you could build a 3-story house on?
It was huge. It was a huge problem. It was a problem that told him that, hey, this probably didn't happen.
The team had no physical evidence linking Sergeant Brown to the cult or to the disappearance of Kelly Wilson. No physical evidence that Wendell Kerr, the trucker, had even been in the state when he was alleged to have killed Kelly. No physical evidence to prove Kelly was ever on the Kerr property. None.
Did you have loads of missing babies, missing people?
No.
Strange markings out in the woods?
No stranger than any place else.
Reports of people at night with torches, strange masks?
No. I never had any of that till that team came there.
Your honed prosecutor's brain is looking at this in a cold, rational manner. What's happening with your emotional self?
I was getting angry. Very angry.
What was shaping up?
I think an innocent man got accused of a horrible, horrible crime that he didn't have a thing to do with.
Sergeant Brown?
Absolutely.
The team was discredited. The Attorney General's office took all 5 of them off the case. In effect, they were fired, and all the theories about witching circles and murdered babies went into the shredder.
I told them, this case must be dismissed, all of these cases, immediately.
Charges against the Kerrs and their various in-laws were dropped. The murder charge as well as the child molestation counts. And then the chief prosecutor went out of his way to clear the name of Sergeant James Brown.
I said that James Brown was absolutely, unequivocally innocent in the disappearance of Kelly Wilson.
Why did you feel you had to give him that seal of approval?
Because that's what the criminal justice system is supposed to be about. We're supposed to make sure that people understand who's innocent and who's guilty.
After he's been all over the TV news, his picture in the paper every day as a satanic killer.
I will tell you.
Is that enough to have the state of Texas say?
No, it's not enough.
Not guilty.
Absolutely.
Forget what you heard, he's not in part of this.
No, it's not enough.
But wait. Some people in the town were outraged that the state had cleared Sergeant Brown so quickly. What about the witnesses? What about the story told by Raymond? Conspiracy theories have a life of their own, and many in town, including Kelly Wilson's mother, still fervently believe that Satan and his wicked disciples have gotten away with murder in Gilmer, Texas.
Sergeant Brown's involvement still makes the most sense to you in some way.
I feel like it was a big cover-up.
But maybe you won't feel the same way when you hear from Raymond one last time.
Did any of that stuff happen, Raymond?
A Touch of Evil. Tonight's Dateline Special continues.
Sergeant Brown had climbed out of his own personal hell to be declared innocent by a top prosecutor for the state of Texas.
So you could step back in and resume your life, right?
At that point, no.
Why not?
It had been destroyed.
His police career was finished, and the stress of it all caused him, as doctors said, to suffer a mini stroke. He walks with a slight limp. He has a tremor in his right hand. And when he goes back to Gilmer, he can feel the revulsion of those who believe he got away with murder.
They shun you. They look at you and point.
Don't hold your gaze.
Yeah.
Avert their eyes.
They don't hold anything. They whisper. Those things hurt.
James Brown's reputation was destroyed by a tale told by a 7-year-old boy and 2 women members of the so-called cult. The members of the team had tape recorded their accounts, and those tapes were about to tell an incredible story of distortion and manipulation.
when these tapes were ultimately turned over to us after some teeth pulling, listening to it, angry, throwing things around in my office, stopping the tape and saying, God, you can't do that.
The tapes were meant to bolster the team's claim that a satanic cult was at work in the woods, but instead, they would prove their undoing. Take the case of Wanda Kerr, the woman in jail who gave a sworn statement that her husband was a member of the murderous cult. In exchange for that story, the team had offered her a deal. With cooperation, she might, just might, get probation.
They told me I had to see my kids.
Listen to her tape-recorded conversation with the satanic experts and the team's lawyer.
Just tell us what you know about what happened to Kelly Wilson. And don't lie to them.
Listen about me.
So
she repeatedly tells the team she doesn't know anything. But after several hours, she becomes confused. Wanda believes she had a vision that her husband killed Kelly Wilson.
As it was going, the pieces were filling in as if it did happen.
Wanda had first identified her husband Wendell as Kelly's murderer before Sergeant Brown came across those trucking records that proved he was out of town when the girl disappeared and couldn't have been involved. On this tape, the team's lawyer, embarrassed by James Brown's find, angrily confronts Wanda.
And you have just flat out lied to us. Now just cut the crap. I don't care about your crying. I don't care about people not believing you. I want to know the truth.
We weren't here.
The insults continue for several minutes.
You are a piece of liar. That's all you are. You realize that this means you're going to jail for the rest of your life.
I don't know. You want the truth? I'm telling you the truth, and I don't know.
The other key witness, a woman named Connie Martin, is badgered the same way. The audio tape is turned on and off as the team pulls a story out of the woman like so much dental work. After one tape stop, Connie Martin has an explosive revelation. Sergeant Brown participated in Kelly's murder.
The tape comes back on, and they say something to the effect of, okay, you've got something else for me? Yes, Sergeant Brown was there and helped with
just
Kelly
like
Wilson.
that.
And then they turned the tape off.
Sergeant Brown was there, out of the blue.
And that was it.
Over the next month, the team would continue working with Connie Martin, honing her story. They're frustrated with her.
Now you understand what we're trying to do. You can understand the pain that we're going through trying to get this information out of you.
If you listen to the tapes and you look at the transcripts, repeated denials. I don't know what you're talking about. No, it didn't happen that way. No, we didn't have anything to do with it.
As time goes by, the witness's story builds, with each new revelation more graphic than the one before. And it's very often the so-called satanic experts who are filling in the sadistic details.
We also know what people do in these little groups. And one of the things they make you do is kill people and drink the blood and eat the body parts and do, screw the kids, do all this kind of stuff.
Where is this stuff coming from? Is this the imagination of Connie Martin?
No.
So these grotesque details are coming from the team, the people working for the state of Texas? They're salting it, they're seeding the ideas?
In my opinion, yes.
Even then, the so-called facts of the witnesses' stories didn't match reality. In the pictures, Kelly had platinum blonde hair, and that's what witness Connie Martin said too. But in fact, Kelly had stopped bleaching her hair, and by the time she disappeared, its color was brown. Likewise, Connie couldn't accurately describe the clothes Kelly wore that night. Connie even told a story that Kelly had been forced to borrow her boots. But Kelly wore a size 8.5 shoe. Connie's foot was 3 sizes smaller.
If the hair is brown and not blonde, if the shoes are not what they're described, if the facts are wrong, doesn't the theory fall apart?
Pretty much. It does in my mind.
But according to Kelly's father and stepmom, Special Prosecutor Lyford refused to listen to their critique of his evidence.
You said this just doesn't add up.
Right. That's exactly what we told him.
As a matter of fact, we met with him twice. We said, convince us.
No one from the team would talk to Dateline on camera. But 2 members of the team did tell us that to this day, they believe the core elements of Connie Martin's story. But what could be more fixed in memory for an eyewitness than the way Kelly was finally killed? Connie Martin told no fewer than 4 different versions of it, each substantively different.
Ultimately, in a final grisly ritual tableau, she's slaughtered.
Yes, and
eaten.
Well, that was one of the stories, that she was barbecued. There were other stories about what happened to her, that she was stabbed, that she was taken somewhere else.
Connie Martin ended up taking her story back.
The Kelly Wilson thing is not true.
Recanting again and again. She could be discredited in court, but the team did have Raymond's account to go with. The child had no reason to lie, or so you might think, until you hear how Raymond's story came to be in the first place. Raymond Smith was in a foster home when child psychiatrist Dr. Bruce Perry had his first opportunity to evaluate the boy's story of abuse and satanic rituals.
There was tremendous confusion, tremendous fear.
Dr. Perry observed that the stories told by Raymond and by some others started to unravel. The claims about ritual slayings and sacrifices in the woods made no sense. Toddlers were alleging that they had removed the brains from dead babies.
And they had a whole list of kids that were supposedly had been born to these mothers and then sacrificed. And when you map it out, it's just physically impossible that this mother would have to have been pregnant essentially nonstop.
Why didn't people get that? These are smart people.
Well, it would have been easy enough to just go and check the hospital records.
Dr. Perry was convinced that the satanic claims had no merit, but he still had to determine if the children from these families had been sexually abused.
One of the things that was clearly complicating this whole situation was that the children that came from several of these families really had been abused. They'd been neglected, they'd been sexually abused, and at times physically abused. And it was appropriate that they were removed from their parents.
But not Raymond, according to Dr. Perry.
There's not a shred of evidence that his mother or his stepfather had been in any way inappropriate to him.
He said Raymond and his baby brother Luther, who'd also been removed from their mother's home, had come from a loving and nurturing family.
If there was anything that was done that was really, really destructive, it was essentially this state-sponsored kidnapping of Luther and Raymond. And
state-sponsored kidnapping?
Well, that's what it was. I mean, it was kidnapping. And it was done under the guise of Child Protective Service. And it was
kidnapping is a criminal term.
Well, I think that what happened...
Do you think that applies to what happened here?
I think what happened was criminal.
Years later, Raymond tells Dateline those stories, the murders, the devil worship, the dungeons, every word of it was completely made up. Invented to please both his foster parents who'd bought into the satanic theory and the social workers intent on coaxing the story out of him.
It was kind of like they'd lead me, and I'd listen to them, and then they'd say, now what happened, and I'd tell them, and then they'd ask me again.
And you're making it all up?
Right.
Hysteria had taken over. After he was taken from his home, Raymond says he and the other children were forced to endure a harsh system of discipline. He says they were forced to run up and down the stairs of the foster home, often for hours at a time.
And if you stopped, you'd get in trouble.
And not stand and yell at you if you stop running?
Right. And just till you're just tired, and you just pretty much till you broke down crying. That's when they thought you were ready.
Ready to release the demons.
It just turns out that in this case, the adults around these kids didn't believe what they were saying and tortured them until they started to give stories.
Tortured them?
Yes, tortured them.
Dr. Perry says the foster family used a technique called holding. The adult would pin the child in a bear hug, face to face.
They will use their knuckles and rub them into the ribs of a child right here.
Show me the technique. Just do it so I can experience it.
It doesn't feel good.
Is that what it is?
That's what it is. And in fact, some of these girls told us that they did it till the kids were black and blue.
Is this sound accepted therapy in some conditions?
No. In certain states, it's been outlawed. It is torture.
Had Raymond been tortured until he made up stories? Dr. Perry wondered. To understand more, he placed a heart monitor on Raymond's wrist. It's not a lie detector test, but it can tell when a child is uncomfortable, like when they're forced to lie.
I mean, I was so angry when this was happening.
She's just the other side that hurts, and after a while you're ready, get in,
he had tried to tell the truth, but that wasn't accepted, and that they essentially used this holding technique on him until he just said what they wanted.
Years later, Raymond still remembers the pain caused by his foster mother, he says, forcing him to make up lies about his mother and her boyfriend.
She'd asked me if my mother and Dawn had ever molested me or touched me or anything like that at first.
And what were you saying back to her?
I'd tell her no, and then she'd just keep on. She'd ask it again, and I'd tell her the same answer.
And she'd keep rubbing?
She'd just keep on, and then finally I'd just say, yes, they did.
Did you figure out that until you gave the answer she wanted, you were going to keep getting this painful rubbing thing?
Right.
How scared were you, Raymond?
I didn't know if I was ever going to go home or, you know.
So here you are, 7, 8 years old. You thought that's the end of the line, huh? You're never going to get out of that house.
Though all three would deny his story, Raymond says the social workers looked on as the foster parent painfully knuckled him while riding in a van. That's when he blurted out the confession about Kelly.
Did any of that stuff happen, Raymond? Were there ever...
No.
Was there ever a satanic cult in the woods, killing babies?
No.
Torturing people?
No.
To your knowledge, Raymond, had Kelly Wilson ever been in that shed?
No.
Had you ever seen her there?
No. I'd never seen Kelly Wilson. I had no idea who she was.
Raymond says he was just a scared little boy with only one goal.
What was your biggest wish back then?
To go home.
Now, years later, he just wants to clear the air. He wants everyone to hear what happened to him, and to make sure that everyone knows Sergeant James Brown, the man he accused and who as a result was destroyed, is innocent. To this day, no member of the team has acknowledged any error in its investigation.
The sad irony of this is that these people really did think that they were doing God's work. They thought that they were doing the right thing. They thought that they were being righteous. And in fact, what they were doing, if anything could be labeled evil, what they were doing was evil.
So Satan is no longer a suspect in the disappearance of Kelly Wilson. But she's still missing. Still an open police case file. Has her killer gotten away with murder?
Coming up next.
I feel like it was my fault, you know.
In what way?
That I was saying things that weren't true.
Damaged lives. Can they ever be repaired? When A Touch of Evil continues. And now the conclusion to A Touch of Evil.
I didn't think the system could go this wrong. I didn't think people could be hurt this badly.
Eerily, it was 300 years ago, almost to the very day Kelly disappeared, that two little girls in New England, still the colonies then, began telling stories about their neighbors. Scary stories that resulted in the Salem witch trials. Before the hysteria ran its course, 19 people were executed for consorting with the devil. In Gilmer, Texas, it didn't get that far, but it came terribly close.
How could this happen in the United States of America? Modern times.
You know, we've thought about this a lot. What this case did was it magnified all of the weaknesses in these systems.
It's not the first time that people wanted to get at a truth that wasn't there. The most infamous, perhaps, the McMartin preschool case. Just as in Gilmer, the California town was whipped into a frenzy with unsubstantiated reports of child abuse and satanic worship.
What happens when a belief system takes hold and when you're dealing with someone where it is a belief system, that you can present 10 facts that don't fit their view of the world, and they'll ignore all of them if there's one fact that potentially can fit into this model. And that's what happened all the time.
In the case of Gilmer, the more bizarre the story, the more willing people were to believe. The town was transfixed, like rubberneckers slowing down at a car wreck, unable to turn away. Horror mixed with fear.
I learned a lot about how easy it is for people, even good people, to get caught up in sort of a hysteria.
Satan wasn't a metaphor.
No, Satan's
Satan
real.
was real.
Absolutely. It's a real thing.
And what about those caught up in the maelstrom of this horrific story? Although the Kerr family was not criminally charged, based in part on Dr. Perry's recommendations, most of their children were removed from their families over concerns that some had been sexually abused. Their friend and neighbor, Raymond Smith, kept away from his home while his mother and her boyfriend sat in jail wrongfully accused of molesting him, is trying to put his life back together. He's back home with his mom and working with his grandfather.
I try not to live in the past. I mean, I don't think about it as much. I just, I've kind of just gone on, and I try to forget about it as much as I can.
He's painfully aware of how much damage the stories he was forced to invent have caused others, and he's trying to come to terms with it.
Do you feel guilty about it all?
I do. I still feel like it was my fault,
In what way?
That I was saying these things that weren't true.
A few years ago, he met James Brown and apologized.
He said he understood.
This little guy did you grievous harm, James.
That's true. But he was a child. He had been tortured by the DHS caseworkers, by the investigators. There was a lot of stuff that they did to try to cover up what these children had been through.
And what of the team that so relentlessly pursued the discredited story of devil worship and murder? The two social workers resigned. The so-called satanic experts, the minister went back to his retreat. The retired police officer is now a court bailiff. The special prosecutor returned to the private practice of law. But before the team could leave town, James Brown hauled them into court, claiming they had engaged in malicious prosecution, violating his civil rights.
The lawsuit is not to get even. The lawsuit is to get justice.
Have you had it?
No.
So far, the courts, all the way up to the Federal Court of Appeals, have ruled against him. The team may not be sued as the courts see it, because however poor their judgment may have been, what they did on behalf of the state of Texas, and are therefore shielded from lawsuits because they have immunity from prosecution.
It says they can go out and destroy anybody's life as long as you're a prosecutor connected to full immunity. You're above the law.
It's a scar that will stay with us forever. While everybody continues to go on with their life in town, we're still under this cloud.
And Kelly Wilson is an image frozen in time now, forever full of life, forever 17. Her friends have moved on with their lives, some married and starting families of their own.
What y'all up to today?
People in Gilmer have moved on as well. Though kids here, as kids will do, have made Kelly Wilson a ghost story, best served up in whispers over a campfire in the woods. There was this girl kidnapped by a devilish cult. What happened to Kelly Wilson? Kelly's one-time boyfriend says he feels the chill.
Years after her disappearance, you're still a suspect, and maybe the prime suspect.
I wouldn't even say maybe. I'd say the prime suspect.
Fingers still point at him.
What happens to your life?
A whole lot of whispers and stares. When I go somewhere, when I walk by, that's the guy who killed Kelly Wilson, things like that.
Chris Denton's face is bloated from the chemotherapy he's receiving for treatment of testicular cancer. And there are some people in law enforcement waiting for a confession.
Well, I hate to disappoint them, Number one, because that wouldn't happen, because I don't have anything to confess. Number two, looks like I'm gonna beat this thing, so I hate to disappoint them.
For Kelly's family, her disappearance is something they have lived with every day for 10 long years.
Just the fact of not knowing. It's hard to describe how that feels. It gnaws at you almost every day.
Do you think that there will ever be detective work in this case that will lead to an indictment, an arrest, or at least an answer to what happened to your daughter?
We had hopes years ago.
Had. You don't have them anymore.
But even now, every few months or so, there are strange echoes, patterns. Lawmen can't help noticing that every couple of years a girl has disappeared from East Texas and nearby Louisiana. Before Kelly, it was Kimberly. Then it was Kayla. Then Christy. All girls similar in appearance, all names starting with a K. Could it be the work of some sadistic serial killer? And then something else. Last April, another young girl disappeared. Her name was Wendy. Police began questioning her boyfriend and learned he was another one of Kelly Wilson's boyfriends. A bizarre coincidence. He's been cleared in Wendy's case and vehemently denies any involvement in the disappearance of Kelly Wilson. Meanwhile, the FBI and state police have reopened the case, retrieving it from the cold case file. But Sergeant Brown won't be working the investigation. He's off the case. He left the Gilmer Police Department and is now working in law enforcement for the state of Texas. Still, Brown, for all he's been through, for all the way Kelly's disappearance has changed his life, always seems to be most alive when he's talking about the case that got away from him.
If he went to work tomorrow, started a clean folder on this thing, opened up a new jacket on the disappearance of Kelly Wilson, what would you begin? Where would you go? Who'd you call?
You start at the basics, ground zero, right back there.
Back at that video shop.
Back at that video shop.
On a winter night, Kelly walks out the door. Her tire is flat. The bank deposit is made. That's all anyone can say for certain. Kelly Wilson has vanished.
That Raymond Smith says he wants to forget the past and move on is a tribute to his resilience and ability to forgive. As for James Brown, the former police officer, he finally took his case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the High Court refused to review it. That's all for this edition of Dateline Friday. We'll see you again for Dateline Sunday at a special time, 8:30, 7:30 Central. I'm Stone Phillips, and for all of us at NBC News, good night.
For a transcript, call 1-800-777-TEXT. Dateline is a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.